until the last one is 18, baby boy. 15 more years, honey. So, this is supposed to be about us.
What does he mean, don't kiss and tell? He's got a mouth like a megaphone. He tells everything.
The soft golden lights hanging across the garden shimmered gently as guests slowly found their seats. The wedding venue looked like something from a dream. White roses lined the aisle, candles flickered beside every table, and a warm evening breeze moved through the decorated trees. Friends and family gathered quietly, smiling as they waited for the ceremony to continue. It was supposed to be the happiest day of Jessica's life. Everyone could see how carefully she had planned every detail. From the elegant floral arrangements to the handwritten notes placed on each guest table, the evening felt personal and emotional. Cameras flashed as Jessica walked through the venue greeting relatives and friends. She looked calm on the outside, but those closest to her knew she had been nervous all week. Not because of the wedding itself, because of her family. For years, the family had experienced emotional ups and downs in front of the public eye. Fans had followed their journey through difficult moments, reunions, misunderstandings, and healing conversations. Many people wondered how the family would act during such an emotional occasion. But nobody expected what would happen during the wedding speech. As dinner was served, soft conversations filled the room. Guests laughed quietly while servers brought plates to the beautifully decorated tables. Jessica and her husband sat together at the center of the room, smiling as everyone raised glasses to celebrate their future. Then the wedding host walked slowly toward the microphone. "Tonight," he announced warmly, "we will hear a few special words from the people closest to Jessica." The crowd applauded softly. Several family members gave short speeches first. Some stories were funny, others emotional. Guests smiled and wiped tears from their eyes during heartfelt memories about Jessica growing up. The atmosphere became more emotional with every speech. Then came the moment nobody expected. The host looked toward the front table. "And now," he said carefully, "Mama June would like to say a few words." The room instantly became quiet. Some guests exchanged nervous glances. Others leaned forward in their chairs. A few cameras slowly turned toward Mama June as she stood up from her seat. She looked emotional before she even reached the microphone. Wearing a dark blue formal dress with silver details, Mama June walked slowly toward the stage area. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. For a few seconds, she simply looked at Jessica without saying a word. The silence in the room became heavy. Jessica smiled supportively, clearly trying to encourage her mother to speak. Mama June finally took a deep breath. "I honestly didn't know if I could get through this speech tonight," she admitted softly. Several guests immediately became emotional hearing the crack in her voice. She paused again, trying to collect herself. "When Jessica was little," she continued, "she always wanted everyone around her to feel happy. Even as a child, she cared about people deeply. She would walk into a room and somehow make everybody smile." Jessica lowered her head slightly, already becoming emotional herself. Mama June smiled through tears. "She was strong long before any of us realized it." The guests listened carefully. "She went through difficult moments growing up. There were times when life felt complicated for our family. There were days when we laughed together, and days when we struggled to understand each other. But Jessica never stopped loving her family." The room remained completely silent. Some guests quietly reached for tissues. Mama June looked directly at Jessica again. "And that's something I'll never forget." Her voice suddenly broke. For several seconds, she could not continue speaking. The audience watched in complete shock as Mama June covered her face briefly, trying to stop herself from crying. The emotional reaction seemed stronger than anyone expected. Jessica immediately looked concerned. "You're okay, Mama," Jessica said softly from her table. Guests later said the room felt frozen in that moment. Mama June nodded slowly before continuing. "There were times I worried I had failed as a mother," she admitted honestly. "I know I wasn't perfect. I know there were moments I wish I could do differently. But seeing Jessica tonight, seeing the woman she became," her voice cracked once again. "I've never been more proud in my life." Jessica suddenly began crying too. The guests watched the emotional exchange quietly as the atmosphere in the venue completely changed. What started as a normal wedding speech had now become one of the most unforgettable moments of the night. Mama June held onto the microphone tightly. "I don't think people always understand how much family means until moments like this," she continued. "Tonight isn't just about a wedding. Tonight feels like healing, like a new beginning." Several guests nodded emotionally. One family friend sitting near the front wiped tears away as Mama June continued speaking from the heart. "You found someone who brings peace into your life," she told Jessica warmly. "And as your mother, that's all I ever wanted for you." Jessica's husband smiled respectfully while holding Jessica's hand. Mama June paused again, clearly overwhelmed with emotion. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of continuing immediately, she stepped away from the microphone and looked around the room. Guests later described the expression on her face as deeply emotional, almost like she was replaying years of memories in her mind. The silence became intense. Then Mama June quietly said something that shocked everyone in attendance. "There was a time," she admitted slowly, "when I worried our family would never have a moment like this again." Several guests looked stunned. Nobody moved. Nobody even whispered. The honesty in her voice completely changed the atmosphere. "But tonight," she continued while crying openly now, "I see love. I see forgiveness. I see growth. And I see my daughter starting a beautiful new chapter." Jessica stood up from her chair, unable to hold back her emotions anymore. The entire crowd watched as she walked toward her mother. Mama June tried to continue speaking, but tears completely overwhelmed her. She placed one hand over her heart as Jessica reached the stage area and hugged her tightly in front of everyone. The guests immediately burst into applause. Some people stood from their seats. Others wiped away tears while watching the emotional family moment unfold. The hug lasted nearly 30 seconds. Nobody in the room expected the speech to become the emotional centerpiece of the wedding. Even the wedding photographer appeared emotional while capturing the moment. Mama June finally pulled back slightly and smiled through tears. "You look beautiful tonight," she whispered to Jessica. Jessica smiled back emotionally. "I love you," she replied quietly. The room erupted into applause once again. But the emotional surprises of the evening were far from over. Because only minutes later, another unexpected family moment would leave the guests even more shocked than before. The applause slowly faded as Jessica returned to her seat beside her husband. Guests continued whispering quietly to each other, still emotional after witnessing the heartfelt moment between mother and daughter. Even the wedding staff appeared moved by the speech. For several minutes, the atmosphere inside the venue felt completely different. What had started as a glamorous celebration now felt deeply personal. Mama June remained near the microphone, gently wiping tears from her face while trying to regain composure. She smiled nervously as guests offered supportive applause once again. "I'm sorry," she said softly, laughing through tears. "I promised myself I wouldn't cry this much tonight." The crowd responded warmly, making the atmosphere lighter for a moment. But emotions were still running high. Mama June looked toward Jessica again before continuing. "You know," she said carefully, "people often see the public side of families. They see photos, headlines, celebrations, and difficult moments. But what they don't always see are the private conversations, the late-night talks, the moments when a family quietly tries to heal together." The room became silent once more. Jessica listened carefully, holding her husband's hand tightly. Mama June continued slowly. "There were moments over the years when I feared we had grown too far apart. I worried that time had changed us. I worried that pain had created distance between people who truly loved each other." Several guests lowered their heads emotionally. "But tonight," she continued, "I realized something important."
She paused again.
No matter how many storms a family faces, love can still bring people back together. The audience applauded softly. At one nearby table, a few relatives quietly wiped away tears while listening. The speech no longer felt prepared. Every word sounded deeply personal and honest. Mama June smiled gently. "When Jessica called me weeks ago to talk about this wedding," she explained, I could hear happiness in her voice. Real happiness. And as a mother, there's nothing more important than hearing your child truly happy. Jessica's eyes filled with tears again. The guests could see how emotional she had become throughout the speech. Then Mama June suddenly looked toward the back of the venue. And I want to thank someone else tonight, too. People turned their heads curiously. A young woman sitting several rows back looked surprised as Mama June smiled warmly in her direction. Pumpkin, Mama June said gently, thank you for always trying to keep this family together during difficult times. The unexpected mention caused another emotional reaction throughout the venue. Pumpkin looked stunned for a moment before smiling emotionally. You've carried so much responsibility, Mama June continued. More than most people realize. And tonight, seeing all of us together again means more to me than words can explain. Pumpkin shook her head humbly, while guests applauded again. Jessica smiled warmly toward her sister. For the first time all evening, the entire family appeared completely united. The emotional atmosphere continued building as Mama June spoke openly from the heart. I know families aren't perfect, she admitted. We make mistakes. We say things we regret sometimes. Life changes people. But love matters most when things become difficult. The room remained completely focused on her every word. Outside the venue, evening lights glowed softly across the garden while music played quietly in the background. The wedding suddenly felt less like a television event and more like a deeply emotional family reunion. Mama June looked down briefly before speaking again. There was actually a moment earlier today, she said slowly, when I sat alone before the ceremony started. Jessica looked curious. I was thinking about how fast life moves, Mama June continued. One day your children are running through the house laughing, and suddenly they're standing in wedding dresses starting brand new lives. Several guests smiled emotionally. And honestly, she added with a small laugh, that realization hit me harder than I expected. The crowd laughed softly with her. But then her expression became serious again. There's something else I need to say tonight. Immediately, the room grew quiet. Some guests exchanged nervous looks again. Mama June held the microphone carefully with both hands now. For a long time, she admitted, I struggled with guilt. Jessica's face changed instantly. Mama June took a deep breath. I kept asking myself whether I had done enough as a mother, whether I had protected my family the way I should have, whether I had been present during moments that mattered most. Her voice began shaking again. And sometimes, she whispered, those thoughts stay with you longer than people realize. Several guests looked visibly emotional hearing the honesty in her words. Jessica slowly stood from her seat again, looking concerned. But Mama June gently smiled at her. No, sweetheart, she said softly. Let me finish. Jessica nodded carefully before sitting back down. Mama June continued. But tonight changed something for me. The audience listened closely. Because when I watched Jessica walk down that aisle today, she said, I didn't see sadness. I didn't see anger. I saw strength. I saw grace. I saw a woman who built happiness despite every challenge life placed in front of her. Jessica began crying openly again. And that, Mama June said firmly, means I must have done something right. The room erupted into emotional applause. Even some guests who barely knew the family looked deeply affected by the speech. At one point, a wedding cameraman lowered his equipment briefly, clearly emotional himself. Mama June smiled while wiping away tears again. You know, she laughed softly. This speech was supposed to be 5 minutes long. The crowd laughed warmly. But mothers never stop talking once emotions start. Jessica laughed through tears as well. The atmosphere became lighter again for a moment. Then suddenly another surprising moment happened. Jessica's husband quietly stood up from his seat. The room instantly became curious. He walked slowly toward the stage area beside Mama June while guests watched carefully. Nobody expected him to interrupt the speech. Mama June looked surprised too. He smiled respectfully before gently taking the microphone for a moment. I just want to say something quickly, he began. The venue became completely silent again. I know tonight is about Jessica and our future together, he continued warmly. But I also want everyone here to understand something important. He looked directly toward Mama June. Jessica talks about her family constantly. She talks about the love she has for all of you. And no matter what challenges existed in the past, she never stopped believing this family could heal. Several guests immediately became emotional again. And after tonight, he continued, I understand why. Mama June covered her mouth emotionally. Jessica looked completely overwhelmed by the moment unfolding in front of her. You raised an incredibly strong daughter, he said sincerely toward Mama June. And I promise to spend my life protecting her happiness. The guests instantly stood up, applauding loudly. Some people cheered emotionally while others wiped tears away once again. Mama June suddenly began crying harder than before. The emotional intensity inside the venue reached another level entirely. Jessica walked back toward the stage again, this time hugging both her husband and her mother together while guests continued clapping. For a brief moment, the entire family stood together under the glowing wedding lights as cameras flashed around them. It became the moment everyone would talk about long after the wedding ended. But later that evening, during the final dance of the night, an unexpected private confession from Mama June would leave several guests completely speechless. Hours passed, but the emotional energy inside the wedding venue never disappeared. Dinner plates had been cleared away, the candles burned lower across the tables, and soft music floated through the warm evening air. Guests slowly moved toward the dance floor while servers brought desserts and coffee to the remaining tables. Jessica and her husband shared smiles with family members as photographers captured every moment. After the emotional speeches earlier in the evening, many guests believed the most unforgettable part of the wedding had already happened. They were wrong, because as the night continued, emotions inside the family became even deeper. Near the center of the venue, couples danced beneath glowing lights while relatives gathered nearby talking quietly. Some guests continued discussing Mama June's speech, still surprised by how emotional and honest the moment had become. She spoke from the heart tonight. One guest quietly whispered. Another nodded. You could feel how real it was. Meanwhile, Mama June sat alone for a few moments at a small table near the edge of the garden. She smiled politely whenever guests approached her, but several family members noticed something different about her expression. She looked reflective, almost overwhelmed. Jessica noticed it too. After finishing a dance with her husband, she quietly walked across the venue toward her mother. The music played softly in the background as she pulled out the chair beside her. You okay? Jessica asked gently. Mama June smiled faintly. Yeah, she replied. Just thinking. Jessica studied her mother's face carefully. You've been emotional all night. Mama June laughed softly. Well, tonight means a lot. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The wedding lights reflected softly across the garden while distant laughter filled the air around them. Then Mama June quietly admitted something unexpected. You know, she said slowly, there were moments when I honestly thought I'd never see our family this peaceful again. Jessica looked surprised hearing the sadness in her mother's voice. Mama June continued staring toward the dance floor. Life moves fast, she whispered. People grow up. Relationships change. Sometimes families drift apart without even realizing it. Jessica reached for her mother's hand. But we're here now, she said softly. Mama June nodded slowly. Yes, she replied emotionally. And that's what makes tonight so special. At the dance floor, guests applauded as another song ended. The wedding host announced that the final dances of the evening would begin shortly. Family members slowly gathered closer together while photographers prepared for more pictures. Jessica smiled gently. You know everybody's still talking about your speech. Mama June immediately shook her head with embarrassment. I didn't plan half of what I said, she admitted. That's why it mattered, Jessica replied quietly. The words clearly affected Mama June deeply. For a moment, she simply looked at her daughter with tears building in her eyes again. You really are happy? She asked softly. Jessica smiled instantly. I am. Mama June exhaled slowly, almost like she had been carrying that question in her heart for a long time. That's all I needed to hear. Across the venue, Pumpkin and several relatives watched the conversation quietly from a distance. They could tell the mother and daughter moment was deeply personal. Then the wedding host returned to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced warmly, "we're about to begin the final family dance of the evening." Guests applauded. The lights dimmed slightly while a slow, emotional song began playing through the speakers. Jessica stood carefully. "Come on," she smiled toward her mother. "Dance with us." Mama June looked surprised. "Oh no," she laughed nervously. "I'm staying right here." But Jessica refused to accept no for an answer. "Yes, you're coming." Several nearby guests smiled as Jessica gently pulled her mother toward the dance floor. Soon, family members gathered together beneath the glowing lights. Some danced quietly while others simply stood nearby, smiling and talking. For the first time in years, the family truly looked peaceful. Photographers captured emotional moments continuously as Jessica danced beside her husband while relatives surrounded them supportively. Mama June stood near the edge of the dance floor watching everything carefully. Then something unexpected happened again. The music suddenly slowed even more. Jessica's husband quietly stepped away for a moment before returning with another microphone in his hand. Guests looked confused immediately. Jessica looked shocked too. "I know this isn't part of the schedule," he said, smiling, "but there's something important I think deserves to happen tonight." The room became silent again. He turned toward Mama June. "You spent tonight celebrating Jessica," he continued, "but I think someone should celebrate you too." Mama June looked completely stunned. Several guests immediately began clapping softly. He continued speaking. "Families go through difficult seasons sometimes. That's normal. But healing takes courage. Showing up takes courage. Loving people through complicated moments takes courage." Mama June covered her mouth emotionally. "And tonight," he added warmly, "you showed this entire room how much your family means to you." The guests erupted into applause again. Mama June looked overwhelmed by the kindness directed toward her. Jessica smiled through tears while standing beside her husband. Then he said something that left the room speechless. "I think Jessica's wedding became more than just a wedding tonight," he said. "I think this became a new beginning for an entire family." The room immediately fell silent after hearing those words. Even the music seemed quieter somehow. Several relatives wiped tears from their eyes again. Mama June looked around the venue slowly, taking in the emotional atmosphere surrounding her family. Then, through tears, she quietly confessed something nobody expected. "I was afraid to come tonight." The room froze. Jessica's expression changed instantly. Mama June looked down briefly before continuing. "I worried people would judge me," she admitted honestly. "I worried I'd ruin the mood somehow. I worried old memories would make things uncomfortable." Several guests looked emotional hearing the vulnerability in her voice. But instead, she whispered, "Tonight reminded me what family truly means." Jessica immediately hugged her again tightly. The guests applauded once more, many openly crying now. The emotional atmosphere became almost overwhelming. Even the wedding staff standing near the back appeared deeply moved by the moment unfolding in front of them. As the final dance continued, family members slowly joined together in one large group beneath the glowing lights. Cameras flashed constantly. Laughter mixed with tears. And for a few beautiful moments, every difficult chapter from the past seemed far away. Later, many guests would describe the wedding as one of the most emotional family celebrations they had ever witnessed. But near the very end of the night, one final private conversation between Mama June and Jessica would quietly change everything between them forever.